Music is geometry, and all the best songwriters have known this forever. Bach used this geometry in his compositions, John Coltrane used these same patterns in his recordings, and all great guitarists use this geometry in their songs too, because the guitar is really nothing but geometry on steroids. And if you don't know how these patterns are laid out on the fretboard, then you will definitely struggle. So to help you avoid the pain of ignorance, I'm going to show you these patterns on the guitar so that you gain the same X-ray vision that all the best songwriters have. And I really do mean X-ray vision because just looking at the guitar fretboard, this geometry is invisible. In fact, this is why it's so frustrating to learn the instrument and music in general. Music, after all, is all about patterns. Scales and modes and chords and progressions, it's all patterns. And since music is sound, and sound is invisible, these patterns are also invisible, so it can seem hard or seemingly impossible to learn and master all of them. I mean, you can kind of see what they look like using finger charts like these, but these black dots are more like a bad photocopy of what's really there. Like this grainy, distorted image of a scene that only vaguely represents what's otherwise plain to see in a high-resolution color photo. And it's the same idea with the guitar. Diagrams like these are meant to teach you, but they don't, and frankly can't, show you what you really need to know. They only help you memorize where to place your fingers on the strings, monkey see, monkey do style, but they don't clarify why the notes of a given scale or chord are used, let alone reveal the underlying geometry that forms the framework of all patterns on the guitar. Patterns, like I say, that all the best songwriters can see within their mind's eye. So here we're going to look at these patterns to really see them not only within your mind's eye, but with your actual eyes using color. And this split screen with the patterns of music theory on top and the guitar fretboard on the bottom, where this fretboard is oriented as if you're holding the instrument as a right-handed player and looking down at it like this. The first step is to take the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, which is the most basic pattern in music. In a simple circle like this, these notes form a closed and repeating loop, while on the guitar, these same notes rise in half-step intervals up the frets on each string. The low E string is a chromatic scale that starts on the E note. The A string is a chromatic scale that begins on A. The D string rises up from D, etc. So the guitar is just a series of chromatic scales that are stacked on top of each other like this, with the notes of the open strings aligned to form a pentagram of E, A, D, G, B, and E. Now, what's important is that everything in music comes from these notes. All scales, all chords, every progression, and every song. They're all derived from this pattern as rearrangements and combinations of these notes. And to picture these patterns, we're using color here. But why these colors in this particular order? Because the chromatic scale, this mother of all note patterns, is actually a rearrangement of the circle of fifths, the pattern in music that explains how all notes are harmonically related. And just as all compatible colors are arranged in sequence in the color wheel, all notes in the circle of fifths are also positioned between their respective neighbors. On the guitar fretboard, notes in the circle of fifths form a column in each fret, with a slight shift in the top two strings based on the guitar's tuning. So C, red, is between F, purple red, and G, red orange. The G note, red orange, is between C, red, and D, orange, and so on, all around the circle and also up and down each fret wherever these notes are positioned. I explain the circle of fifths in more detail in the links that are added to the video notes, but you get the idea. The chromatic scale and the circle of fifths are just rearrangements of one another. And on the guitar fretboard, together they form an interlaced matrix where the notes on each string follow a chromatic scale pattern, and the notes within each fret are stacked in a circle of fifths sequence. And it's within this interlaced framework that you can see the geometry of music, especially when you first remove the little shift in the top two strings, at least temporarily for the sake of illustration, and then expand this matrix a bit to get a better look. By extending the strings or chromatic scales from left to right, while at the same time extending the column of each fret by adding more strings to the top and bottom like this to get a larger grid. In fact, we could continue expanding this matrix forever in all directions since it's made from patterns that are cyclical and therefore infinite. But to keep our bearings, we'll keep it to something like this. Again, this is just an expanded view of a regular old fretboard, where each string, every horizontal row of notes, is a chromatic scale, while vertically each column is a circle of fifths sequence, like repeated streaks of the color wheel. And within this organized grid of notes, you can move through musical space in any direction. For example, you can play this C major scale rising up through the notes from this low C to its octave, or descending from high to low, where the path is divided across different rows, strings, and columns, frets. No matter where you move within the matrix, the same pattern appears for you to play any octave of C major, or any octave of the G major scale, or the D major scale, and so on. The patterns are consistent for every key in every octave, which is wonderful. And this alone makes it much easier to master the guitar, just being able to see how all of the notes are laid out in this organized array. But there's actually much more to see here when you look even more deeply at the rows and columns of this graph to really see how they're interlaced to form geometric patterns. In fact, we can even treat this grid as a kind of Cartesian graph, referring to the system developed back in the day by René Descartes to visualize patterns in geometry, where you have a horizontal x-axis and a vertical y-axis that intersect at a central origin. But instead of delving into the actual mathematics of geometry, which, to be clear, we're not doing here, instead of saying the origin has a value of 0, like in a traditional Cartesian graph, it's simply the tonic, or interval 1 of a given key, like this C note, for example, in the key of C. And when you do this, you can quickly see how all of the notes are positioned in relation to the tonic on the fretboard. With C1 as the origin, for instance, you can see how the x-axis traces the line of the chromatic scale, or a given string, while the y-axis aligns with the circle of fifths pattern of a given fret. And with these axes in place, we can now plot the positions of all scale degrees in this key, drawing lines from the tonic to their respective locations to trace the distance between notes and intervals. And the resulting patterns create a symmetrical array that shows the 6 geometric symmetries in this key, including the connection between the tonic and its tritone, which is part of this geometric shape, and the star of subdominance and dominance, the triangle of major thirds and flatted sixths, the square of flatted sixths and major thirds, the hexagon of major seconds and flatted sevenths, and the dodecagon of flatted seconds and major sevenths. All of these interval patterns are predictably positioned in relation to each other, radiating out from the tonic in an outward direction and converging toward it, moving inward. Remember, what we're looking at here is just an expanded view of the guitar fretboard. In other words, the guitar is really only a small window into what's essentially a giant organized matrix of geometric patterns. So once you can see these patterns and crack the code, you can quickly master the guitar. I explained the significance of these geometric patterns in other videos. After all, this is only a 10-minute overview, but what matters is that these patterns form the essential framework for all scales, modes, chords, and progressions in music. So this grid of musical connections is like the lattice in a garden, you might say, which provides the framework for flowers and vines and ivy to grow. Just as the lattice is essential to the pretty plants, this grid is the foundation of all patterns in music. And what's cool is that this same geometric structure applies no matter which note is the tonic or central origin. So for example, we're not limited to just this one C note, because the notes repeat at regular intervals across the fretboard, like all of these other octaves of C. The same consistent patterns appear even when you shift to any octave. Whether it's here, or anywhere in the matrix, the same symmetries apply, all repeating at regular intervals across the matrix to form, like I say, this organized lattice of notes, guiding your eyes, mind, and fingers across the instrument, because there's a definite and visible logic to this structure. And not only in the key of C, as we've looked at in these examples, but also in every key as well, including the key of G, with any G note as the tonic or central point of origin. The very same interval patterns appear in this key, and also in the key of D, same geometry, and in the key of A, same intervals, etc. These patterns are present in every key. Patterns that are more difficult to picture with the interval numbers alone. I mean, the underlying relationships practically disappear here, and they're virtually impossible to intuit without any symbols at all, which is how most people see the guitar, as a blank fretboard just staring you in the face. But with these colors, informed by the structure of music theory, you can't miss the intricate geometry, which is plain to see. Of course, we are only scratching the surface here. There's much more to this geometry and how it forms the framework of all patterns in music for you to navigate the fretboard, to play songs, and to write your own songs too. So over in the community at Locals, you'll find a full PDF with all of these diagrams and much more detail on these patterns. This PDF is 189 pages for you to thoroughly crack the code to the guitar. And to actually play all of these patterns, to use this geometry in a practical way, in scales and chords, you just collapse this matrix back into the fretboard that we started with to get a smaller grid like this. Then you just add the little 1 fret shift to the top 2 strings to match the guitar's tuning, and just like that, we're back to the regular fretboard. Only now you have the advantage of really knowing how the notes are laid out in this slice of the matrix, where all of the patterns are still present, you're just looking at them through a smaller window. So while most people see the guitar as an assembly of wood and metal, drawn to the beauty of its body and knobs, you see much more, that you're really holding an infinite matrix of geometry in your hands. And with this knowledge, you'll save years of frustration to get to the fun part of really mastering the guitar. So thank you for watching. Let the algorithm know if you liked it. And for the full-length video and PDF, click the link in the video notes, and I will see you in the next one.